I think that's something beautiful about that, and that's why the artist, I believe, is so important to a societal structure, is because we help people to see and see differently.
Hello, print friends, and welcome to the 86th episode of Pine Copper Lime, the internet's #1 printmaking podcast. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. I release weekly podcasts with people in the print world who are doing something a bit beyond the expected. So please subscribe on that podcast listening app of choice. You can also find PCL on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and you can find all of this and more at pinecopperlime.com. We also have a Patreon where generous, lovely, and charismatic print fans sign up at tiers that start at just $1 a month. This is a great way to show support for PCL and help keep us bringing you printmaking content every week. We also have a new feature, a new extra thank you for people who are signing up at any tier. It's called Shop Talk with our editor, Timothy Pauschak. These are brief, short, all business, quick and dirty tips and tricks conversations with our guests. What's the least known best secret for registration? How did you go about learning chiaroscuro woodblock carving? If animals could talk, which one would be the rudest? This is technical printmaking nerd content at its finest. Check it out now through the link in the show notes. Also, Pine Copper Lime has merch. If you like funny t-shirts, if you like printmaking, if you like supporting the show, if you like confusing cashiers. Check it out now through a link in the show notes. Printmaking forever, shun the non-believers. Pine Copper Lime is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, who've been offering a diverse range of high-quality products to your printmaking practice since 1997. Products like their brand new line of professional relief inks, beginning with the flagship color Super Graphite Black, which they developed in collaboration with printer and artist Bill Fick. Formulated with all the working properties that artists demand, these light, fast inks roll out consistency, transfer beautifully, and clean up easily with soap and water. So, if you want to take your practice to the next level, head on over to Speedball's website to see where you can pick up a can of your new favorite color. My guest this week is Steve Prince, an artist and educator based in Williamsburg, Virginia. Steve and I had an absolutely beautiful conversation. We talked about embodying the art that you make, how all the experiences around you, especially the uncomfortable ones, shape you, culture care and the benefits of traveling, and why we all need to just keep making. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to be the art you want to see in the world with Steve Prince. Hi, Steve. How's it going?
It's going wonderful, Miranda. It's such a pleasure to connect.
Yes, I am really excited to talk to you because I feel like I discovered your work through Instagram, and it was just this light bulb moment of, wait, where has this person been? How did I not know about this person before? It just seemed like I just saw a couple of your pieces and was just blown away by them, and then was following you, and you just seemed so like prolific, and just every image is just a stunner that I've seen from you, and I'm just really excited to get to know you and your work more.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that.
Yeah. So before we dive into some questions, would you mind introducing yourself just a little bit, as I like to ask my guests to do, and just let people know who you are and where you are and what you do?
Well, my name is Steve Prince. I am living in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, and that's where I grew up at. And I went to Xavier University of Louisiana for undergrad. Concentrated. I got my BFA from there, and then I went on to Michigan State for graduate school, and I got my MFA there in printmaking and sculpture. And over the course of my career, I've been primarily an educator in terms of, how do you put the bread on the table, so to speak. But at the core of me, I am an artist. And currently, like I said, I live in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I'm the director of engagement and distinguished artist in resident at the Muscarelli Museum at William and Mary University. And that's a post I've been holding for about 2.5 years.
Wonderful. And then I also know that I think congratulations are in order for you, as you have just been awarded the Engage Art Contest Prize. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, that was I was awarded about a month ago, and right now all the kind of promotional stuff has been, flooding the airwaves, and I've been getting different interviews from different people and so forth. And it was definitely a tremendous honor to be able to receive recognition for your work and what you do in the everyday, and for someone to recognize it and call it some of the top work that's being created out there in that competition, and also back it up with throwing you some cash.
Yes.
That's always a great thing.
It's always very nice when we can get a little bit of money in exchange for all of our efforts as people in the arts and as creators. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background? So you said you grew up in New Orleans. Can you tell us what role art had in that part of your life?
Well, one of the things that I've said, oft times as it relates to my background, I was a person that knew exactly what I wanted to do for my future. I knew ever since I was 5 years old. And as the story goes, I remember being a 5 year older, and we're living in the house that I was born in. It turned out not to be a house that I grew up in mainly, but my father was a collector of encyclopedias, and we had maybe like 3 or 4 sets of them. And I know that makes me a dinosaur now because encyclopedias have been replaced by Google. But nonetheless, we had a bunch of them in the house. And so I used to go over there and pull them off of the shelf. And the thing that, of course, that captivated me and the encyclopedias that he had in the house was that they were full of these beautiful pictures. And this particular day, I pulled off the shelf the letter M. And I was flowing through there, and I was looking inside of the book, and then I hit the name Michelangelo. And I saw this image of Sybil, which was one of the characters on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
Mm.
And I was so enamored by the picture that I tore it out of the encyclopedia. And then I went and got some typing paper, and I got a pencil, and I tried my best to copy that drawing. And I was drawing it piece by piece. And then my sister came over my shoulder, and she went, "Ooh, Steve, I'm going to tell Mom." And of course, the iconic response, "What? What? I didn't do it. It wasn't me."
Yep. Yeah. That sounds right.
Of course, all the evidence is in my hands, and I'm sitting there with the book. But I remember, soon after going to, elementary school, and of course, that question you get asked by teachers to stand up to introduce yourself and say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And my response for many years, I said, I want to be like Michelangelo.
Mm.
So those are my earliest memories, of saying it. And then, as I'm growing up, one of the key things that end up happening is that I had this drive within myself to want to become an artist and make this work. But then I had this affirmation outside of me from my friends and from my teachers and from my household that was very creative. And that encouraged that creativity. So at no point throughout my entire career did I ever hear those words, negative words that basically say you're going to starve as an artist, right, in my ecosystem. People will say, oh, Steve's an artist. When the teacher would call out and say, hey, who in here can make a bulletin board? I didn't have to raise my hand. The whole class pointed me out. It said, Steve,
Mm-hmm.
And that's been my path my entire life. Is I've been, many times without me saying a word, people will call me out and pass my name on. And it's like this word of mouth kind of thing that's been going on, and of course, as an artist, I'm definitely an extrovert. So I approach it, and I guess in some terms you might call it aggressively, but I'm proactive. I want to create, I want to make, I want to connect. I want to deposit this work within the societal structure. I want to speak about things, so that's what drives me. And I've been this way all my life.
Well, I think that's actually a wonderful characteristic for an artist to have, because I think artists do get that stereotypical locked away, tortured soul uh, image that portrayed in the media, but to really be out in the world, to see your work, you need to be the one who's the driving engine behind that. You know, if someone has to, you can make all the most beautiful images in the world, but someone has to, in this day and age, photo them and put them somewhere where people can see them. Otherwise, it's just a closed loop of you making for you. Yeah.
Correct. I'm just to add on to that, I've been really blessed with the ability to speak, very clearly about my work, and I know it inside and out, and I develop and I create from that kind of passion, in terms of I'm thinking constantly as not only about the symbolic information that I'm embedded with into the piece, but I'm just having a constant conversation with the work as it's being developed. And so when I go before people and I do talks, I mean, just when this whole pandemic started, and I'm not exaggerating, I've done over about 40 lectures. And, and all these have been on Zoom. And I've just been doing these talks in colleges and high schools and programs and, talking to, doing, all kinds of different projects. I've been teaching workshops, and it actually just ramped up, in terms of just my whole life and just expression within this medium. And, I'm not shy about speaking up about my work because I feel I'm the best person who can speak about it. Not just that someone else with a keen mind or keen eye could not say some things that I didn't see, which I've had people write about my work and say some beautiful things. And I was like, wow, I love what you said. It's a beautiful poetry that you extracted from the work. But ultimately, I know I can speak the work best.
Yeah. I always think that's such an interesting question about art, about, where the meaning of it lies. Is it in the artist's intention? Is it in how it's received? Is it in, its legacy after the artist has passed on? And so that idea that you can be kind of the best voice for it and the best advocate, I think, is really true. And then there's also that whole other interesting side of the life of these objects that you make that go out into the world. And when you're not around, they're just speaking for themselves. And people can have whole different relationships with them that you maybe weren't able to foresee.
Absolutely. I think that's beautifully put. I was speaking at this Midwest college 4 or 5 years ago, and I was called to this college to speak to the students about me being an artist, but also an artist of faith, and all these kind of things, and then also talk to them about moving from an undergrad structure possibly to grad school or out in the marketplace and trying to make it as an artist. And I have a lot of insight on all those different levels. So I was sharing with the group, and then a good portion of my talk was fixated upon me talking about my work and then laying out these symbols and these stories and these narratives. And then a lot of my work is really challenging you and pushing not just you, but it pushes me. And so I get to the end of it, to the Q&A portion. And then there's this professor in the back of the room. And he basically raised his hand. So I said, yes, sir. So he's like, you know, I was listening to you talk and so forth, and when I went to school, and one of the things that happened in school is that we were taught that the artwork should speak for itself, and you did a lot of talking about your work and going into all these details and talking about the stuff, and I'm just trying to reconcile this in my mind. And so, and he said, I just want to know what you think about that. And, as it relates to this idea of artwork speaking for itself. And then in the contrast to you doing a lot of talking about it. So I said, thank you for your question and your statement. And I said, the first part I started with was, I said, well, I hear and I understand that whole notion of the artwork speaking for itself. I said, when I was in grad school, I remember that very clearly in that particular space where my fellow classmates, they really worked from that tradition, and I kind of learned it, how to navigate within it, and I work within that structure. I said, but my undergraduate experience at Xavier University of Louisiana, which was an HBCU or historically Black college and university down in the South, was very different. My experience there is that when we were in the studio and we were having conversation and we were talking about artwork, it didn't just fixate upon just the making of a beautiful image. We talked about everything. We talked about relationships, we talked about politics, we talked about sports, and you just name it. All these things collided together in that environment. We talked about, all these different, any current issue, past issues, history, everything came out in that space. And it was really just open, dynamic space that I just was just clamoring to get back to every time, because sometimes we have like these 3-4 day arguments about stuff. It just keeps going. That's what it was like. It was rich. And then I likened that whole idea. I said, that space, by me being at Xavier University, was very much like being in my house. It reminded me what it was like inside of our kitchen. It reminded me what was around our kitchen table. It reminded me of the food on the stove that was going, and my mom and my sisters and my aunts would come over, and these conversations would happen. And it would just be this rich roux of interactions that would happen in that space. And I said to the gentleman and to the audience, I said, I would hope that as I speak to you, that you hear the traditions where I come from. And as I respect that tradition of the artwork speaking for itself, I come from a different one. And I hope that you respect that tradition, which is very much embedded within the oral tradition, speaking about these issues. And I said, my friend, my artwork, yes, it speaks for itself. But guess what? I do too. That's what I shared. And that's what I think about that idea of speaking for self. Like, don't deny the artist who is ready to speak and talk about the intricacies of the work. Allow that to happen, because that is another layer to my art that can get missed, is that I am the art. I am the embodiment of it. Those strokes, those cuts, those prints, that pressure, that was done by me. It was not done by a surrogate. I understand every intricacy of the piece. I knew how it rolls up on the ink. I know what the ink smells like. I know what the tools feel like when I cut and I angle and I dive into the matrix. I know every intricacy of it. Let me tell that story, because I think people will really enjoy to hear that level of depth and understanding.
Steve, you gave me goosebumps. That's just so beautiful. Like, that, hearing you talk about how, particularly with the medium, like the relief carving, it's just this physical act where you're diving into the medium, and how it's your body engaged in the making process, and so you are the art. Oh, it was just so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah. And I think it is really, really significant what you're saying about, challenging those assumed hierarchies and structures about how we engage with art. Saying
Yes.
that like this is how it is, the way it is, how it is, because this is the way it's always been done. The art must speak for itself. And it's like, why though? Well, like, who made that story? That's not my
Yeah.
story. And and that you were
Yeah.
able to sort of push back against that and really question these things that are in the art world that I think people don't. They just assume. They're like, well, I was told this, so I'm telling you this, and this is
Hmm.
how it happens. But
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's just in that moment, later I felt the depth of it in the offense of his statement.
Mm-hmm.
In the moment I didn't. I just addressed it. I was able to break it down in such a way that I think that he could understand very clearly, that I laid before him an understanding that these are traditions and they all viable, I think. But open yourself up to hear a different way. And if I'm different from what you've experienced, take me in. And because I've done that before, when I left the South and went North, and I had to take in that experience that was very much in diametric opposition to who I thought I was, and who I thought I should be, and how I thought my environment should be. And that's what you learn when you travel. As you
Mm.
talked about, going these different places, that you can't be that same person that you were at those. I mean, to a large degree, you are that same person, but you are altered by the surroundings and by the rhythms, history, and the culture, and the norms, and so forth. And you got to pay attention to those things, because you can do something that you think is already nice and regular, but just be completely offensive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to be, and that again is about culture care, I think. and paying attention to your neighbor and listening and watching and learning and being respectful, but knowing that you're going to make mistakes. But I think that when you're moving and operating in that level of respect, I think the person that may see you make the mistake or see you make the faux pas, whatever it may be, they can receive it and they know that you are genuine in your heart.
Yeah, if we can, connect on that really human level and understand that for a lot of it, like these rules, these ways that we're sort of taught, like this is how something is done, this is better than this is offensive, this is not, that's cultural, that's societal. But
Mhm.
there's in Thailand is as a deeply Buddhist country, and there's a lot of empathy taught in Buddhism as a faith. And there's a mantra that's something like, if you find yourself at odds with someone, you say, I am a human being and I wish to be free from suffering, and you are a
Mm,
human being and you wish to be free from suffering, and we have
mm.
this in common. We both want to be safe. And like it can kind of shatter some of those stories that we tell ourselves about you're you and you're me, and that's somehow a problem. you know yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And that's rich. That's rich. I mean, there's so much to be learned from the faiths of this world, and they enrich us, they inspire us, they cloak us, they guide us, they do all these things for us. And it's always just remaining open and sensitive. And I think that the artists, I think we understand that because or we understand that very well because we are sensitive to material. We're sensitive to our nature that's around us. We are sensitive to the feelings and the empathies that we may feel from a person as we talk and as we
Mm.
interact. And those things, that sensory nature, like as you said earlier about this idea of the that tortured artist, I
Mm.
think a lot of it goes into just that, you know, how deeply I feel about some things. When I see stuff happen on television or I read things in the paper or some book I've read or whatever, and I'm moved by it. I'm moved by it so much to the point where I'm compelled to create something and to document it in this visual text. I think that's something beautiful about that, and that's why the artist, I believe, is so important to a societal structure. Is
Mm.
because we help people to see and see differently, um,
Yes.
and we take the everyday thing and we show you the beautiful complexities of something that may seem to be simple, but it's loaded with so much more information if we just stop to to break it apart. You
Yes.
know.
And it's really wonderful that you sort of specifically in that moment were talking about the everyday and that sanctifying the ordinary that the artist can do, because I really notice that within your own work, that you'll have these moments, moments between two people, moments between a man and a woman, and it's just two people sitting across a table from each other. But what you've done with the composition, with the lines, with the movements, with the distortion, they just vibrate with emotion. You capture the power of moments that happen every day in a lot of what you do, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like some of that imagery that you kind of evoked is tied into a series that I started a few years ago. It's called the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
I'm making an allusion to the Old Testament of the Bible, but I basically created a new thesis. And basically, the phrase that I came up with is that true love is like an Old Testament made new each day. And so when you think about a love that you profess to someone, and if you spend that time with them, then that love you profess to them is an old love,
Mm.
and you're constantly trying to renew it and go forward together. And so those couples and those images, I kind of reduced it to a certain kind of almost like a script, whereas the couples in those images are always touching. Sometimes their look may look stoic, may look contemplative, may some in some instances may there may be some angst, But I think that that's just the nature of living with someone. You
Yeah.
know, that's the nature of occupying a space with another person and going through all the things that you go through in your own individual body as male and as female or whatever that couple may be, in terms of that configuration. You still got two people that are individuals that are colliding in this space, and they're trying to navigate it and make it work between the two of them. And so that's what that series is about. And so I played around with the angles, ant's eye view, or bird's eye view, or a fish lens, elongation, exaggeration. The body begins to take on almost like a tapestry like quality, where it has this repetitious marks that are almost like quilt patterns on the body. So all those things I'm drawing on, that becomes part of this kind of vocabulary around us that gets almost projected onto the human form in this three-dimensional structural space. That's what I'm drawing on.
Yeah. When I was looking at them and going through particularly that series that is, as you must say, is the Old Testament one, being someone who is, about to enter my third year of marriage, which I know is still quite new, mm-hmm. but really I saw in that, when you talk about like that angst sometimes and that contemplativeness, mm-hmm. I saw myself and my own relationship in that, because it is a difficult undertaking to say you are going to bind your life to this other person who has their own wants and desires and motivations and hopes and fears and baggage and traumas, and you have all of your own, and we're somehow going to put them together and try to make it work because we love each other so much, and we can't not do it.
And that's just those two people. That's exactly. Not including the family and the brothers and the siblings right. and the aunts, the uncles.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Who have all of their baggage and trauma and hopes and fears. And like, they're all bringing it to all these interactions, and this idea of a relationship like this, as this sort of undertaking where these two people are coming together and really trying to make it work and pushing through difficultness to build something that's bigger than the both of them. And yeah. I just really saw that in the way you captured these moments between people where they're connected, but there is that strife and there is that effort and there is that deep, deep, clear connection between them at the same time. It was just so beautiful. And I was like, yeah, that looks like marriage. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm so glad of course, a married person could understand it and see it. But I shouldn't say just a married person, a person, because some people are not necessarily married, mm-hmm. but they're together. So they understand what that bond means when you're in a long-term relationship with someone. So I have to qualify that with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely true. Yeah. Although at least for me, I've personally felt the shift change when I got married. And I think it's because I was like, oh, I can't bolt in the night anymore. I have to sit here and work through this, Yeah. I can't just, but I think that, that's part of it. And it's been a surprisingly, like, I didn't think of marriage as an undertaking that leads to a lot of personal growth, because that's not the story that you're told. You're told they lived happily ever after. But it actually is quite an invitation to improve oneself just in order to make your life happier with another person. So it's all of it I saw in those incredible images. So thank you for those. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'd love to circle back for a minute when you're talking about being an artist of faith, because I love this idea. I love the idea of faith and how it relates to creative energy, the connection between faith and art that you see since time immemorial, that there's that connection there. And I do think it's something that people sometimes can be kind of reluctant to talk about, because there are a lot of people who do have baggage around faith or had negative experiences with traditional church structures or religious structures of any kind. But, I think that faith and creation are really closely bonded, and that it doesn't necessarily have to follow like an organized religious structure for people to kind of tap into that. And it's something that I just am fascinated by this idea of, and I'd love it if you could speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely. That's a really big question.
Yeah.
But I was formulating in my mind how I would respond to you, and where would I start? So I guess I need back to New Orleans, because so much, as any psychologist would talk to you, your baggage or whatever the issues you have, it goes all the way back to your childhood.
Right.
And so, growing up in New Orleans is very much a Catholic city. At least it definitely was when I was there. I'm not sure if it's shifted at all, but I'm assuming that it's still the same. I went to Catholic schools from kindergarten through college. And when I was in elementary to 8th grade, and a little bit into 9th grade, I was an altar boy. And so I served, in the church right beside the priest, and, did all kinds of things from mass to Stations of the Cross to funerals to weddings. I did it all, as relates to the church, and was there on 6 o'clock in the morning services, many a day, almost falling asleep on the pulpit, to services during Lent, to everything, just all these different services that I was involved in. And then I got to high school, which was again a Catholic school, and nuns were in my life, and I mean all the way through high school, I only had maybe two male teachers to that point through high school. And I got to college, and I went to Xavier University of Louisiana, which is the only Black Catholic college in the Western Hemisphere. So I ended up going there, and I went through all those shifts that you said, where I started to kind of break from the church, and I was having some issues with Catholicism and with the doctrine. And, one of those areas I was having a little trouble with was one of the areas that my sister was kind of arguing against us about the role of the woman within that Catholic structure. And then I remember there was a key moment in high school. So I jumped back away from undergrad, but I was in high school and I was in this civics class. And every day our civics teacher would have an individual go up to the front of the class and read a scripture before class started. So he had this podium with his Bible on it. And so he would call somebody up. And then this one particular day, one of the female students in the class raised her hand and said, "Mr. leave his name blank." He said, "Why don't you choose any girls to come up and say the scripture?" And it was like and everybody looked.
Yeah.
But it's like we weren't ready for it, that she would ask this question. So we all, the whole class turns, looks at the teacher, and he turned red in the face, and then he gave this explanation to basically say that, he said something about the disciples and that they were all men, they were followers of Christ and whatever, and this was supposed to be, and she's like, then she just argued back and said, well, women can't be filled with faith and can't do those things just like men do. So what makes us different? And then then finally he just like, this is my class and you're going to do it the way I say to do it. And it's going to be this way. And then she barked back at him, and then he kicked her out. And then everybody's in the class is like, it was just like silent, everybody's looking. And then he like slammed his book on the desk, and he just like, get your books out or whatever. And, but that thing was etched in my memory, that moment. And I remember the conversations that we had at lunchtime about what took place in that class. And I started talking about things that I hadn't thought about. I never thought about it up until that point. This is like I was a freshman in high school, so I was an altar boy, and I never thought about the fact that there were no women or girls that were holding that role. From the pulpit to the altar boy, there was none.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the challenge. But ultimately, through it all, and through my journey, I understand the human frailties. I understand the human imperfections. And I understand that when it comes to faith, we're the ones who mess it up.
Yeah.
We're the ones who misconstrue it. We're the ones who use it for our own gain. And we're the ones who take it and flip and twist the doctrine, and we delete words and we flip meaning and we make it mean whatever we want to. That's where the problem is at. It's in humankind. And that's where the frailty is at. So the faith is the faith. And that which you read is to be true, and you know it's true, and you know it's right. You literally can feel it.
Mm.
And you know when you're doing something wrong, and if you put something in your brain enough to justify it, then you will believe that in that lie.
Yeah.
And or in that untruth, or you will keep a blind eye to certain issues because you don't want to take that time to think hard and solidly about it. That was a quote by Martin Luther King. Rarely do we find men who willingly engage in hard, solid thinking. There's an almost a universal easy answers and half-baked solutions. Nothing pains some people more than having to think. I've taken those words to heart. And so fast forward. When I talk about my faith, it is embedded within the philosophical structure of my work, which it draws upon the New Orleans jazz funeral. And if you think about the New Orleans jazz funeral, it's broken up into two parts. The first part is called the dirge, where the mournful tune is played for the person that's being laid to rest. And once you get to the gravesite and that person is placed in the ground, the music moves from a mournful tune into a celebratory tune. And that celebratory tune is called the second line. The second line has multiple meanings. The one thing may come to mind, you would say, well, if there's a second line, then what's the first line? The first line is your life here on earth. The second line is the afterlife. But let's think about that same concept in the natural. The first line is the family that's associated with the person that is being laid to rest, whereas the second line is the community and the cousins and the family that are in the community that comes out and girds the first line in support of that loss. And so I thought about that idea from a philosophical way in terms of my work is about a lot of my work deals with the dirge, deals with those hard issues, not just simply about things that are dead and dying. It's dealing with those issues that we have around us, whether it be on a micro level or on a macro level that we grapple with on a daily basis. Whether those things that we deal with internally, or those things that we deal with in family, or those that we deal with in our community, or that we deal with in our nation, or we deal with nationhood, or with our planet. Those are issues of the dirge. And the issue is if we confront those issues of the dirge, then I believe we can move to a space that is akin to the second line and we're still alive. And so therefore there has to be this transference. There has to be the process of dealing with the hurt and the pain and then burying it and then allowing for a new relationship to birth itself in that moment. And so if somebody can do that from a spiritual level, they'll say that they are spiritually saved, to go into the water and use the water as like this kind of cleansing amniotic fluid that washes away your sins because you profess it out of your mouth. And then you are now saved, not perfect, but you're spiritually on a track where you're trying to right yourself and you're trying to rid yourself of a way in which you thought that was damaging not only to yourself but to others. That is an idea of salvation. So it's a process. So the dirge is a process. The second line is a process. And it's not to say that you're just going to simply deal with the dirge and you move to the second line and you stay in this place of kumbaya. It is also to say that you might flip back to that dirge at times, but you got to go back to the process to get back to the second line. And so that's what my work does. So at no point, no matter how harsh the image I may deal with or how harsh the history I may grapple with, I always put a spark of hope in my work. In many instances, I even begin to help point the way I think we should go. Not to say that it is the way. I'm trying to think and trying to envision. I'm trying to imagine who we could be. That's what I'm trying to go towards.
That's so interesting to talk about, to hear you talk about sort of pointing the way and having that spark of hope in your work, because we talked about a bit of your series about the Old Testament, which is this very kind of one-on-one, two people in the world making their way in the world images, but you do also have some really heavy images as well, that I'm guessing are not part of that series. That's a sort of a separate branch.
I want to say that it is part of the series a little bit, not overtly. It's more subtle. That series is an interesting shift in my work because when you look at it, you mostly see the tenderness that's displayed between the couple. Now, I'll give you an example of a piece that looks pretty benign on the surface, but then if you dig a little deeper, and you don't have to go too deep, you just got to know the surroundings and to begin to understand the narrative. I made this piece as part of a series called Judges. Delilah didn't do it. In the image, there's a man sitting on a porch, and a woman's behind him, and he's kind of sitting between her legs, and she's braiding his hair. They're sitting on a porch of one of those New Orleans shotgun houses, you know. And then off in the distance, not too far distance away from there's a street, and there's an interstate that's passing right through the community. And then you, on the other side of the interstate, you see more houses and structures over there. And so from one level, when you look at this, you just see it looks like an everyday kind of happening. It looks like a hot summer's day, and the guy's getting his hair braided. Mm-hmm. But it's not. The street in which they're on is called Claiborne Avenue. The section of town where I have them at is in an area called Treme. That's Treme. Mm-hmm. Treme is the oldest African American municipality in the United States, located in New Orleans. It is in an area called, also that they have an area in there, it's called Congo Square in Treme. Mm. So they're sitting at this spot by this bridge that in one point in history was not there. It came there when it was making the interstate go from the East Coast to the West Coast of the United States. And the communities that were affected deeply by the interstate in its path across the United States were Black and brown communities. They were the ones who were disrupted because they used a law called eminent domain, and they was able to seize their land, and they was able to run this interstate, and they did not put it through those areas where the affluent lived. They pushed it through the areas where the poor lived, because they knew that they had no rights, and they knew that they did not know how to fight against this system. Because when that bridge was supposed to come through New Orleans, the original architects were running it through the French quarters. But the people said, absolutely not. You're not going to mess with our cash cow, because that's where they make the money in New Orleans, off of that section. So they ran it through the Black community and disrupted and dismantled and pushed people back even further than they did with the laws and the issues that they had in relationship to African Americans within that particular, in New Orleans. So that piece shows that bridge there, and it shows another street called Esplanade. Esplanade was the road by which, during the time of slavery, when they came off the Mississippi River, transporting slaves to the slave-holding house, that's the road that they went up and down, bringing them into the community. And the guy who's in her lap that's getting the hair done, he looks like he might be dead, but he's not. But I put him in a posture that plays off of a very old biblical construct, which is called the Pietà, the slain Christ in the lap of Mary. But if you remember the title, I said it's called Judges, Delilah didn't do it. And I begin to even speak about the ways in which they talk about the Black woman in relationship to the Black man, where she's emasculating him by the ways in which she's excelling within education and ways she's getting jobs, and the Black man is falling into the incarceration circles and he's dying off and all these kind of things. And I'm debunking all those notions to say, no, that's not what's happening. That Black woman is very much a strong and sturdy figure who is working very hard and supporting of this man and supporting of the family and trying their best to deal with the issues that are embedded within that societal structure. All that's in that piece, but it's just like a woman braiding braiding the hair of a man.
Yeah, no, thank you for giving that just incredible example of how much you can fit into a singular image. And it's just the way you tell that story, where you're going all the way back to the Pietà, and through colonialism and slavery in America, to the building of the highway, and it all can fit into that one image, which, as you say, is just an everyday scene. That's really incredible. That it's and I think it speaks to, in a philosophical way, the fact that all of our everyday scenes in life are, whether we think about it or not, built upon all of these moments in the past. Built upon, even like bringing it back to Christ, in the way he changed the philosophy of the Western world, which we were then brought up in. that it has these structures that we live in, to, the way that our cities and towns are built, the fact that we sit and do things where we sit and do them actually does have all of that history in there. It's just we're not either taught about it or we don't think about it in every moment, but it's always there.
It is. No, very rich, very richly there. And again, I think that's the role of the artist. That's what we do. We bring all that stuff to the surface by what we make and what we create. And I think one of the greatest set of artists that I believe that do that so well are printmakers. We live in the world of multiples, and the fact that we're making this element that's speaking, that we can speak to multiple people with this singular image that gets repeated over and over again. Of course, that is if we use, we're not doing monoprints or monotype, but nonetheless, there's something about that printmaking community, that is so close knit, and connected. And, no matter what printmaking studio I've gone to across the country, and I've been to a few outside of the States, in Canada, down in the Bahamas, down in Brazil, that I've been to, and in Cape Town, South Africa, every single place is the same. I mean, it's like this, you walk in and it's just like you smell the ink and it's just like you're connected instantly. And then you see these pieces on the wall, you look on a drying rack, and it's like it's universal, it is so beautiful, and I love it. And I've been so fortunate in the past like 3 years. I've done these residencies in these different places. Like I was at Notre Dame at this place called Segura Art Center, which is no longer there, but I spent like 10 days there. I was there. Then last year I was at University of Tennessee, and I spent about 10 days there as well, just working in the studio, connecting with students. And then 2 years ago, I was at the University of Iowa. And I loved being there because, I was up at University of Iowa, and one of my printmaking idols, she went to school there back in the 40s. Oh. And she went there at a time when, her name was Elizabeth Catlett. And she went there at a time where she couldn't even live in a dorm. They had a separate apartment for her off campus where she stayed, but she navigated all that, and she worked under the great Grant Wood, American Gothic, and that was one of her professors who went to bat for her in the end because they tried to deny her MFA because they felt that her credits that she was taking some engineering classes, they thought they didn't tie in. And he said, no, this makes complete sense. He said she's taking those engineering classes because she wants to be a sculptor. And that level of understanding she's gaining from those classes is going to help, is helping towards her degree. So they definitely follow suit, and so I'm at this school, I'm making work there. So I didn't sleep on the fact that I'm walking on the grounds where she walked at before. The building where she went in terms of the art department, that building was closed off. It got flooded like some time ago, and they built a brand new art department, but I walked around that building, I stayed in one of Grant Wood's houses, and that's where I slept at every night, and just embodying that history and those people that were before me, and to know that I worked within that lineage, that I'm part of that historical lineage, and I'm drawing from those people. It's just so rich, so rich.
Yeah, I love that theme that comes up in a lot of these Pine Copper Lime talks, is people talking about that sense of community and the fact that they can go anywhere in the world and they may not even share a language with someone, but they share the language of printmaking. They share annoyance if someone is gouging an ink can, like that is the same no matter where you are. So you're talking about being a part of your art and speaking for your art, and that you felt that you kind of we're just sort of blessed with this gift that you can speak about it really, really well and in a way that engages people. And I know that anyone who has listened to the podcast thus far, or listened to this episode, up until this point, is certainly going to agree with you. Do you have any advice for people who find that a bit difficult? Because I know some artists I've even talked to who I love their work, but I'll invite them on and they'll be like, no, I can't talk about my work. And it's just this kind of block or this fear. Do you have any words of wisdom as someone who has found a way to engage with your work through verbal communication?
There was a point where I was really shy, and again, that shyness was really about insecurity and worrying about how people looked at me, and some of that shyness was about growing, and I was growing very rapidly, and I'm like 6'6", so I'm tall, and and some of that was that growth, that awkwardness that you were going through, and not comfortable in your own body. Some of that was about growing up being a black man in America. Some of that was up in New Orleans, where there's an issue between dark skinned people and light skinned people, and there's this that's a whole nother story. But I'm a dark skinned male, and some of that was the issue too as well. So I was grappling with all these different things. Some of it was just about some degree of repression that you feel within your household, growing up in the Southern home, where it's very strict, a lot of rules, but very much hardworking, dedication, all that stuff, and you have to have work ethic, and you really pushed in those kind of areas. So that's a mix that everybody's going to have. It's going to be unique to each person that they have to navigate. But the word that I got that I received, I think I was in undergrad, and I was going to speak at the school on the East Coast, and I was nerved out about speaking. And the person said to me, are you going to talk about mathematics or English or science? Or are you going to go into any of those areas? I said, no. I said, what are you going to talk about? And I said, I'm going to talk about art. And I said, isn't that the thing that you study and you do all the time? Isn't that the thing that you really know better than all those other subjects? And so that's what I would tell a person. It's like, that subject,
Yeah.
all you got to do is think about what you've done, think about what you're doing, and just talk on that. Don't go outside of it into some other areas where you're going to feel even more uncomfortable speaking about it. Speak about what you're doing and just talk to that. And people will receive that. I've been a teacher and educator for many years. So I've worked with middle school to high school. I taught at a community college. I taught at a 4-year private institution. I taught at a 4-year public institution. I've taught 25 years now. And so for many of those years, I've worked with students to have them, be able to do presentations, develop elevator pitches and so forth. And so I've worked with them in front of the other students. I say, somebody go close the door. And I said, you're in a safe space. And the safe space that you're in is with me and you're with these other fellow students in here. I said, you're not under attack. And so you can speak about your work, and I will stop you on those areas where I think that you may need to be stopped and encouraged on. And then I'm going to really give you strong encouragement where I think the areas where I think you spoke really well on. And so there'll be times the student be talking, they'll be going, stop.
Yeah.
Take your time. Say what you want to say. Breathe. Relax. You don't have to say every 3 seconds. Just relax. Say what you want to say what you mean, get it out of you. And when I talk to a student like that, it just relaxes them.
Yeah.
It puts them in a place where they feel comfortable and they feel that safeness. And I say, when you go before people, now people take all kinds of tactics, like look at the crowd and make like everybody's naked, like you're naked with them and all that stuff. I don't do all that stuff. What I do is when I go before somebody, I pray before I walk into a space, and I pray to center myself. And I pray to get myself to move out of the way. And I pray that those things that are deeply set within me, that they can flow out of me in a fluidity before my audience, and that they can connect with it. And I pray that those words and whatever I'm doing in terms of this work, that it was, if it's just one person in that audience or 2 or 2,000, however many, let it touch those people and let them be moved by this work. And let it do something, whether it be just in them talking about the work or there's some issue that they might be grappling with, let it intersect in their lives. So I know what art has done for me and how it's transformed my life. And so therefore, don't harbor that gift. Let that gift out. and share it in every part of you, every fiber of your being. And that's why I would encourage people. And then when I go into class and I'm teaching to the students and I'm saying, you may not be the most eloquent and the most, be able to speak on it, whatever, but you're going to be able to speak with some level of competence and confidence that will be received. And everybody has different gifts. I have a gift. This is a gift that I have to be able to talk the way I talk about my work and so forth. So I don't take it for granted. And nor do I flaunt it with some kind of level of arrogance. I know that a lot of other artists, have told me over the years. I have enough affirmation that say, "Oh, Steve, you speak so well about your work." Oh, blah, 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 and it says to me over and over. And I mean, of course, I've worked at it, and I'm constantly. Many times I bombed up on talking, at least in my own eyes. I felt like I didn't do as well as I should have, or I said something I didn't want to say, or I didn't elaborate on it, and I just I should have said this, and you do that, and that's what you do. And I have a thick skin, so I just say, well, it's done what's done. Just move on, make the next piece.
Yeah.
And I approach life like that. There's times you make this art piece and it's like, it's just not working.
Right.
Move on.
Yeah.
Get in the corner and pull out something else, and then get that groove going with something else. Just keep it moving. Create. Life is too short.
Yeah. Beautiful. I think that is the perfect words to kind of wrap things up on, is just keep moving. Don't get caught up in what you perceive to be your failures. Don't let your ego try to tell you a story about where you're supposed to be or what you did wrong, and just keep making. I love it. Before we sign off entirely, would you please let people know where they can find you, where they can see your work, where they can follow you out there on the World Wide Web?
Yes, absolutely. So there's several places where you can find me. So I'm on Facebook, and of course my name is Steve Prince. I am on Instagram, and you can find me there, and my handle is @OneFishStudio. So spell it all out: ONEFISHSTUDIO. And then my handle is also One Fish Studio when I'm on Twitter, but it's the number one, then fish, then studio. Write those two words out. And then I'm sponsored by 3 different galleries. One of them is called Black Art in America. It's located in Columbus, Georgia. The other one is called Zucot, and it's spelled ZUCOT, and it's located in Atlanta, Georgia. And the third gallery that represents me is called Stella Jones Gallery. It's located in New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm in the process of courting a couple more galleries, so if you go to any one of those sites, like Instagram and Facebook, you will see those new spaces being added onto me where I'm showing. And then people can direct message me. If you just want to buy the artwork directly from the artist, I am here for you. But I'm definitely part of my galleries and spaces, because they do things for me in ways in which it's very hard to do for yourself, and trying to navigate and be the marketing and be the cheerleader and be, I got to do the work. And so I'm very much appreciative of those galleries that represent me and that put me out in the marketplace. And I know, of course, I in turn help them out and keep their spaces going. So it's all about community. And that's what I believe that as an artist works and operates in, that drives me as an artist, is connecting to that community, speaking about the community, making artwork about it, making artwork with it. So forth and so on.
Wonderful. Well, I will put links to all of that in the show notes. And Steve, it has been an absolute pleasure. You've made my week. This has just been such a great talk, and thank you again.
Indeed. No, thank you so much. It was absolute pleasure to meet you, to see you face to face, and I look forward to the opportunity to be able to share the studio time together and in the coming future. So I pray you, the best of health and both mental, mind, body, and spirit as you continue to navigate your days, and just continue to connect with other artists, and just that this program can just reach so many people. And I'm so honored to be able to be a part of it, and that you found me in the wilderness, and
the wilderness of Instagram. Yeah.
And so I'm so glad that our paths crossed, and I just knowing you for a short period of time, I can sense you have a very fresh spirit, and so I'm just really thankful and grateful to have met you on this journey, and just looking forward to the ways in which we can stay connected and do work together.
Oh, thank you so much for saying all that. I feel the same way. I think that we're both seekers on the journey and artist spirits, and I think that hopefully this will be the beginning of more collaboration and friendship and all of that. I really like that. Well, that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Angela Pilgrim. We'll talk about the influence of the 1990s, making it without the connections of a university, and printmaking as perseverance. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing help from Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.